Are they small? Just a minute, yes. Just a minute. Okay.
On slideshow.
Is it okay now? Is it
Yeah, now it's
better?
on slideshow.
Okay. Okay. So it's mainly about the researcher just wanted to prove that if you didn't provide the macro levels, mainly the sociocultural context of the proverb, you will never be able to render it accurately into the target language. So if you didn't make the target readers be able to understand the socioculture connected to that proverb, you will never be able to understand the meaning as accurate as it's supposed to be delivered. So in chapter 1, the researcher noticed that students in Benghazi University, this is one of the prominent universities in Libya, faced issues when translated texts that have cultural science. He also noted that he didn't study methods of translations. He only studied famous theories of translation. They didn't focus on translation theories that really mattered in the translation field. So he thought maybe this is why they have problems when trying to translate texts that has cultural importance or cultural science. He couldn't translate it. So Arabic proverbs have many cultural science. They are widely used by everyone, even till now in the Arab world, such as this is an example. رجع بخفي حنين بيدي لا بيد عمرو. Actually, those proverbs, I just want to say that they have very famous stories. We use them. I use them. My mother uses them. Everybody uses them all the time. Maybe we forgot the stories that traced or behind them, but we use them all the time. For example, رجع بخفي حنين. This is a proverb to show that for example, if you went to another country to study abroad, then after 3 years or 4 years you couldn't succeed. You just was failure. You were failure. Then you go back home. This is what we call رجع بخفي حنين. This is something shows disappointment or failure. You were supposed to achieve something but you couldn't. بيدي لا بيد عمرو, something like that. It means that, for example, if you were supposed to lose something, then do not allow your enemy to be the reason for your loss. You do it by yourself. If you are supposed you're destined to be a failure or you're destined to be killed, for example, then you do it by yourself. Do not allow others to do it to you. This is called biyadi la biyadi am, which is translated with my hand, not with someone else's hand. Raja بخفي Hunayn, he came back home, or Raja, he returned with the shoes of Hunayn. So maybe maybe if we have time, I tell the stories later. Um, the rationale for this study, the study is mainly based on the fact that most of the modern standard Arabic proverbs used in this study do not have equivalent in the target culture. In English, of course, we talk about the English culture. It's known that every culture has its own set of proverbs that reflects its culture. Most of the translation works or studies focus on using different approaches translating proverbs. That's why the researcher decided that by analyzing them based on micro and macro analysis, considering context and situation, so they would sound natural, making sense to speakers of the target culture. The main aim of this study is to analyze the modern standard Arabic proverbs based on micro and macro levels. In translation of MSAP, just to be brief on them, I don't want to keep saying them all the time. By MSAP, we mean modern standard Arabic proverbs. So the objectives of study: 1, to explore a range of approaches to translation; 2, to investigate the strategies used by a group of fourth-year students at Benghazi University. And the researcher decided that he does the research on fourth-year students because he assumed that they're gonna have a better level in English language and Arabic as well, and they already know enough information about translation theories that would enable them to be able to conduct the research in the level that he wants them to do it. Number 3, to discover the extent to which the macro level of Arabic proverb is valuable in rendering archaic standard Arabic proverbs, because those proverbs are not like are not understood in modern standard Arabic. You have most of them were produced in the first place, originated in the first place in a very old times. So probably not many people know the story or the situation or the context behind them, but we know how to do them, how to use them accurately. So most of them were kind of archaic Arabic needs. Even educated people cannot understand them very well, but still they have stories that are very popular in Arab world. Popular in Arab world. Number four, to promote a better understanding of those proverbs in Western cultures for native speakers of English, to make recommended for translator and translation students regarding the strengths and weaknesses of those approaches, to enable the application of the theory of setting to translation, to assess translators and translation students when they seek to find equivalence in the target culture, how to handle it. To fulfill those objectives, the researcher will analyze the samples based on micro and macro analysis levels. I don't think I have to repeat research questions because they are answers to the previous questions, right? But because actually we have a lot of many slides, so I just am trying to be fast as much as I could. So these are the answers to the objectives of this study. So research hypothesis. The study had the following hypothesis. It's assumed that students learn certain strategies which they use as tools translating modern standard Arabic proverbs. Students are aware of the equivalence of some of these proverbs. Students are supposed to read the situation and context of those proverbs. The situation and context of those proverbs plays a decisive role in rendering them into English. Bilingual Arabic-English dictionaries cannot help students to be able to understand the meaning of those proverbs. Only situation and context can. The contribution of this study. One, this study can help in discourse analysis of proverbs by providing micro and macro analysis. Two, provide a new approach, translation of proverbs for other researchers later to be able to know how to handle those kinds of proverbs when rendered in other culture. Three, reduce the semantic ambiguity of those proverbs, especially when they are read by Western readers. Four, promote the application of setting theory to text. Outline of the thesis. One, this is introduction, research questions, objectives, rationale. Chapter 2 focuses on language, culture, translation, covering the definition of translation, cultures, translation, proverbs, idioms, metaphors, previous study related to translation of proverbs. Chapter 3 discusses in detail most of the well-known translation theories, formal and dynamic theory, NIDA and Catford and NIDA, on communicative theory by Newmark, and the text linguistic model that's followed in this dissertation. Chapter 4 is dedicated to problems that occur when translating text in micro and macro levels. Chapter 5 focuses on Benghazi University study, objects of the study, proverbs chosen, methodology of this research, data collection and model of analysis. Chapter 6, results of the research and the findings and recommendation for other translators and researchers later on. So research methodology, the data of this study is taken from فرائد الأدب في الأمثال والأقوال الثائرة عند العرب. This is a very popular book that only has sayings and proverbs that's very popular in Arab world. And the book took 7 years of work to be accomplished, and it provides context and situation of each of the proverbs. That's why the researcher decided to make use of this book. And this book is considered to be one of the masterpieces in Arab world and dedicated only to proverbs and popular sayings. The data is proverbs that are randomly selected from this book. There are 20 proverbs, and the students that conduct the research also are 20. They are fourth-year students from Benghazi University, as explained earlier. So the University of Benghazi, just a little bit of information about it. This is one of the prominent universities, very old and best known university, one of the best known universities in Libya. It was established on the 15th of December 1955, and it has publications about 150 50,000 publications. So it's kind of big university. Database and subjects, 20 Libyan undergraduates, they are in 4th years, and from English department at the University of Benghazi. Their ages range between 20 and 30, males and females, 4th year students. And they studied some theories about translation, like the most important ones, but not very focused on translation, as the researcher explained earlier. So 20 students were chosen and 20 modern standard Arabic proverbs as well. The given one
I think we are losing you, and are you still there? I don't hear anything here. Does anyone hear something?
No, sir. Probably Han have internet
Okay.
internet issue.
Right, so let's wait for a little bit. So it seems that
Hello, assalamu alaikum. Sorry again. Actually, I made, in case I had a disconnection issue, I have internet on my mobile, so I just
30
get it
seconds.
connected.
Just for 30
Sorry
seconds.
about, yes, sorry about that. So, can you still see my screen? Where did I stop? Hello?
Yes, Han. We can
Yes,
see your
where did I
screen.
stop? Okay, you cannot see my screen? Okay, just a minute.
Put that on slideshow, please.
Yes. Sorry. So which slide I was stopping at? I mean,
You were talking about Benghazi University.
okay. So 20 students were chosen and 20 modern standard Arabic proverbs as well. They were given 1 week to be able to translate them without consulting professional translators of Arabic or Arabic teachers. They were allowed to use dictionaries, bilingual and monolingual needed, if needed. Students were allocated numbers as student 1, 2, etc. The results were calculated based on percentages. The 20 proverbs were selected because they are still highly used till now, but cannot be understood if the situation and context are not provided. The research depended on the models of Catford's linguistic approach and, where possible, needed dynamic equivalence, as well as the 6 standard of textuality from the text linguistic model by B. Grande and Dressler in 1981, situationality, which is linked to macro analysis. Can you hear me? Because I'm worried that I get disconnected.
We're
Can you hear
listening.
me? Okay. Micro levels and macro levels. 3 types of error were investigated at this level: syntactic, semantic, and stylistic translation issues. Macro levels under the heading, the situation of occurrence of proverbs were analyzed by examining and providing the context of those proverbs in order to give the reader a clear vision of the intended meaning of those proverbs. This section will consider students' attempts to translate the situation and context of those proverbs. So the situation for every single proverb was provided to them, and a specific coding scheme was going to be used like that. Yes, but, no, but, and MD, missing data. Yes, it means that the student translated the situation and context of proverb as accurate as they could. Accurately, I mean, the student translate, yes, but the student could translate the situation, but didn't mention the context. No, the student translated the situation of the proverb, but the translation is not intelligible. No, but the student didn't translate the situation, but provided its dynamic equivalence in English. And missing data, it means that the student left the situation and context untranslated. So, chapter 2, because I'm supposed to be covering the 3 of them. And by the way, just I need someone to tell me the time because because we have many slides and I don't want to waste time of Yvonne and Stella. because we have many slides about 100. So if you notice that some parts need to be skipped, just tell me. Just stop me, interrupt me, and tell me to skip them. Chapter 2, language, culture, and translation. And for me, I just took like one definition for each of them, and if needed, just an example, so to be fast and be able to finish quickly. But I'm afraid that the theoretical part has a lot of information covering many aspects, so I hope I can cover it as much as I can. According to Neubert and Trev, translation has always been a unique source of knowledge and wisdom for mankind. According to Newmark, translation has been instrumental in transmitting culture. So there is a relationship between translation and culture, and both of them are connected, like cannot be separated. Translation and history. According to McGrath, translation is as old as language itself, and it was first discovered 3,000 years ago by the discovery in Egypt, by the discovery of Rosetta Stone. This is the one that you can see in this photo, that has pharaonic hieroglyphic words, text that could be interpreted later. So some call it the equivalence concept. That takes us to the equivalence concept. Some call it as sublime equivalence. And the word sublime can tell us about the way they consider or deem how the equivalence is such a refined concept. According to Catford, translation means replacing textual materials. According to Nida and Tabor, it means naturalness of text. Bell, 1991, translation is the replacement of representation of text in one language by representation of equivalent text in a second language. Equivalence, note, equivalence is a magical keyword in translation, because every translator achieving success if they could achieve the equivalent text exactly. Most of the time, this is a challenge faced by translators, that they want to have equivalence achieved, but with different variations. It depends on the efficiency of the translator. Newmark 1988 considered translation to be a skill that aims to substitute a source language by a target language. He explained that translation is a craft. And when we say the word craft, it means a skill. Skill means some techniques and strategies to be used to be able to do this craft. And usually people who are crafted, they are very skilled. So it shows us the translation needs a very skilled and efficient translator to be able to do it in the right, to deliver the message as accurate as it could be. Language and culture. According to Chaika, language can be seen as a way to describe and represent human experience and understanding of the world. These constructions, views, beliefs, and histories are communicated through language. Of course, there is a relation between language and culture. According to Besant, language is a heart within the body of culture. So that shows us that the relationship between language and culture is a relation that cannot be separated. Besant also explained that it's like flesh and blood. Can you hear me? I'm worried.
We are listening.
Okay. Okay. According to Tiang, in 2000, supports Besant's example. He said that language and culture make a living organism. Language is the flesh and culture is blood. And of course, if we say the expression flesh and blood, it means that they are one entity, one being. Without culture, language would be dead. She views both of them as inseparable entities. Sorry about that, Tiang. I don't think he's a guy. I don't think she's a girl. I'm supposed to write he. He views both of them as inseparable entities. Flesh and blood just got some photos to break the ice because it's very heavy materials. So language is a tool that helps us to comprehend culture. Language is a product of culture, society, connotation, denotation, and translation. So I explain it very quickly. Denotation, it means like, what does the word mean in bilingual dictionaries? Connotation, it means translation and translator face many issues in relation to equivalence and terms that have different cultural connotations. By connotations, we mean, for example, it's snowing for Eskimo. If you said the word it's snowing for Eskimo, Eskimos, they wouldn't be able to understand what exactly you mean because the word snowing for them brings different connotation. They have different context for snow rather than everywhere in the world. If you said snowing for Eskimos, they wouldn't relate. They wouldn't be able to relate what exactly you're trying to deliver. For example, the bird owl in English and Arabic culture. In English, owl is a bird that brings good luck, and they like it very much. But if you wake up in the morning in Egypt, for example, and you found owl on your windows, perching on your windows, you would feel like something is really bad going to happen, because we believe that owls bring bad omen or bad luck. So rather, it's different, totally different from English culture, because they have different connotations. So this is the difference between connotation and denotation and translation. And of course, there is a relationship between denotation, translation, and both of the terms. Language is a tool to understand someone's identity and culture, civilization, and attitude. Another example from Emily Dickinson's poetry Rose and Rosemary in regard to denotation and connotation. For example, if you try to look up the words rosemary and rose, then you probably find in the bilingual dictionaries that they are herbs and kind of plants. But if you try to find them, rose brings to mind the connotation of those words. Rose brings to mind love, romance, and passion. Rosemary brings to mind the sense of summer and the preservation of herbs in English culture. For example, for me, it has different connotation because whenever I think of the word rosemary, I think of soup because I add it most of the time to soup when I cook them. Example, lunch in English language, it has the meaning that light meal. In Arabic, it means a very heavy meal. The word dog in Arabic culture, it means something dirty. Sorry to say that. Not a very nice thing. Not a very nice thing. Usually we use it as to insult people. In English culture, it means faithful friend. And for Chinese, it means guarding creature. People who are members of a specific tribe, culture, or state will see the world through their inherited ideology, translation, and customs. And this is about translation. The context defines the meaning. So we need to understand the context to be able to understand the meaning. And that takes us to example of the word table. For example, the word table in English, they use it to express all kinds of tables. But in other culture, for example, it's used to deliver the meaning that something, a piece of furniture. And they use many words for that, for like maize in masa or in Indonesia meja, and many words in German, I think tish, something like that. In all those languages, it refers to a piece of furniture, but in English it refers to all kinds of tables. Translators face complexity when they render language from one culture to another. Translations, they need to find bilingual dictionaries. It's gonna make them more confused if they are trying to translate like culture-bound terms if they do not know the context. Language and culture play an important role, really, if not vital, it's really vital in the process translations. We need to know, if you are a translator, you need to know the culture very well to be able to translate accurately. According to Snell-Horney, language is not seen isolated, suspended in a vacuum, but as an integrated part of the culture. Translation and culture, that takes us to talk about covert and overt translation. In a covert translation, the source text is connected in a specific way to the source language, community, and culture. Proverbs are examples of this. Overt translation enjoys the status of original source text. So probably here we're talking about covert translation, because covert translation is mainly concerned with the source language, community, and culture. Culture problems, usually translator, when they try to translate, they think of whether they should use cultural adaptation or they have as a compensation technique or to keep the exotic character of the source text, the uniqueness of the source text. Therefore, the translation of proverbs is considered to be covert type, as I explained, which represents difficulty and is loaded with many cultural signs and connotations. Cultural difference are the hardest to be handled by translators because a translator, he doesn't need to be only bilingual, he needs to be able to understand the culture of the source language and the culture of the target language as well. According to Mailhack 1996, to ensure the effectiveness of communication takes place, translation must not only be capable of bridging the gap between languages, but also between cultures. According to NIDA, problems translation can be divided as follows: ecology, material culture, social culture, religious culture, and linguistic culture. So, according to Newmark, words which I didn't explain those because if I explain them, we're gonna consume a lot of time. But according to Newmark, those words which represents universal values, for example, death, star, life, die, they do not cause problems in translation. However, problems arise when cultural words that make translation difficult unless there is a cultural overlap between source language and target language. Ecology, it means plants, animals, local winds, mountains, plains, etc. Food, of course, clothes, housing, transport, organization, custom ideas, religious culture, of course, gestures and habits. For example, if in Indonesian culture they are trying to be respectful to the teacher, for example, they kiss their hands in a way. I don't think they are kissing their hands; they kind of bowing or something like that. I used to do it when I was in Indonesia, but this is what we mean by gestures and habits. And of course, we mean political, social, legal, religious, artistic. All of those are included among the elements that explained earlier: ecology, material culture, social, religious culture, and linguistic culture. Translating culture science is controversial issues. Of course, Vladimir says that when rendering elements of the source culture, you shouldn't be devoid from the target culture. The translator relies. Can you hear me? Silent. Yes.
Yeah, we are
Can
hearing you. Carry on.
Okay, I'm just worried because totally silent. So the translator relies on different procedures that enables him to convey to members of target culture the content of that particular element. Translation of those proverbs, modern standard Arabic proverbs, shapes a number of challenges for translators who tries to translate them from Arabic into English. When translating them, those issues are going to be handled. So how they are going to handle them and tackle those issues, this is the challenge faced by translator. That takes us to proverbs. What the definition of proverbs? Proverbs plays an important role in Arabic culture. They are considered to be a type of wisdom. Arab expresses their high regard for proverbs by using them in their daily lives. Most of the time, we use them all the time. We never skip a day without using them. We have them in ads. We have them in football matches. We use them most of the time. According to Aristotle, proverbs are in the nature of evidence. If one advises another not to make a friend of an old man, he's supposed by the proverb, never do a good turn to an old man. Again, the principle of killing the sons when one kills the father is supported by the proverb, he's a fool who slays the father and leaves the children behind, cited in Walton, 1976. That was explained by Aristotle to highlight the importance of proverbs. About the characteristics of Arabic proverbs, just brevity and intensity. Example of that: praise is slaughter, which is in Arabic two words: al-madh, al-dhabh. Al-madh, it means to praise someone. Al-dhabh, it means to slaughter someone. So they just use two words, even with no proverb, with no verb at all, just two words, very, very brief, very quick, very intense. Al-madh, al-dhabh, it means that if you praise someone, you excessively praise someone, then you make them feel self-conceited. If they self-conceited, it means that you hurt them by making them believe that they are so good, then it's like metaphorically you are slaughtering them. So praise, slaughter, al-madh, al-dhabh. Many attempts have been made to define proverbs. Actually, they said that it was very hard to find like standardized definition for proverbs, but Flavel defines proverb in 1993 as guidelines for life. Based on the collective folk wisdom of the people, such riches are eagerly sought after at any age in mankind's development. They are also pithily, even wittily, like the enjoy, of course, we can see that they have wittiness. So probably those proverbs enjoy those people who are saying proverbs are very witty and very intelligent, very smart because they produce it very quick and it is to the point and to the context and delivers a message. So as a result of refining process that often takes them through various versions before they reach their polished final term. They are the wisdom of many and the wit of one. And this is a very good expression because this is a wisdom that has been inherited by many, and then it could be delivered as a witty quote by just one person. Metaphors. Because if we talk about proverbs, that takes us to talk about metaphors, and I'm not going to talk about metaphors a lot. We also studied that in the second term, but metaphors result from a cognitive process that juxtaposes two or more normally associated reference, producing a semantic conceptual anomaly, the symptoms of which is usually emotional tension. The conceptual process that generates metaphor identifies similar attributes of the reference to form an analogy and identify dissimilar attributes. So we have two dissimilar attributes of one thing to produce something different. So example of that in Arabic, lend me your attention. It's عيني انتباهك. عيني انتباهك. It means that your attention is something that I ask for as money. Please lend me, instead of saying lend me money, I say lend me your attention. So here attention is portrayed as something that's materialistic that I want you to lend me. So this is one of the expressions that we use it most of the time in Arabic. أعيرني انتباهك. Please lend me your attention. According to Newmark, a metaphor is used to describe an entity, event, or quality more comprehensively and concisely and in a more complex way than is possible by using a literal language. The word-for-word translation of metaphor gives a translation that's incomprehensible and out of context. Example, a dark horse. I don't know if you use it in your languages or not, but this is one of the expressions used in election, in American election, but we use it most of the time in Arabic culture as well, especially in Egyptian football, in Egyptian league, I mean football league. They say, for example, if a team that's not supposed to play well, but they could play really well, unexpected. It was unexpected that they play well. We call them a dark horse. In Arabic, we say الجواد الرابح أو الحصان الأسود, which it could be translated literally the black horse. So related or very similar to a dark horse. Example, William Wordsworth's poem of Lucy, a violet by a mossy stone half hidden from the eye. He means by a violet by a mossy stone. A mossy, it means muddy stone, half hidden from the eye. He means his beloved. So probably she was very beautiful girl, but surrounded by many bad people. So he wanted to say that she's like a very nice flower. A violet is kind of flower, but surrounded by very bad people, very bad surroundings, which means a mossy stone, half hidden from the eye. Example, غادر محمد المسجد بينما كانت دماء شرايينه أساوة تتوسل بلهفة وتهتف يا Allah. The translation of that Muhammad left the mosque, and as he did so, the blood in his veins became a mass of imploring voices. So of course you can see the metaphor that the blood in his veins, the blood is imploring as a human being personification and calling out, oh God, Ya Allah. So idioms. Idioms may be understood as expressions that cannot be realized simply by knowing the surface meaning of the words in the expression. According to Langlotz, he stresses that the colorful linguistic spectrum of expressions called idiom directly reflects the considerable difficulties linguists face in finding an appropriate definition and classification of these linguistic phenomena and to explain their grammatical behavior. I just give examples. روح جاتك ريح حماس, which means that you're wishing someone to meet bad circumstances. روح, just go. جاتك ريح حماس, I wish that you are encountered with a very hot wind that could make you destined for doom, for example. Another example from English culture, break a leg, which if it translated literally, it means حظا طيبا, good luck. In Arabic, we say حظا طيبا, which means good luck. If we translate it literally, break a leg, of course, it would make no meaning. The meaning would be distorted. Example for that, under the weather. If you say I'm under the weather, it means that you are feeling sick. You're feeling sick. You're not feeling really well. Evaluation of some works in the translation of Proverbs. The research of Horace Greeley in 1955 is about dramatic and rhetorical functions of proverbial materials in Shakespearean plays. So it's really different from this study because he focused on antiquity of proverbs and discussed a lot of issues regarding definitions of proverbs in general. But he didn't focus on aspects like macro and micro analysis. According to Walton, this is another study in 1976. It was about the function of proverbs in certain works by John Bunyan. Walton's study is a critique of Bunyan's work, The Pilgrim's Progress, which relies heavily on proverbs for symbolism, but not investigated like from micro and macro levels, like mainly focused on symbolism concept. The third one, the Chinese researcher Pan discussed in his dissertation how context plays a role in the translation of educational proverbs. He focused in his study on the vocabulary education in proverbs. The main objective of his study was to investigate vocabulary of education as was provided in the shape of proverbs. According to Abu Sha'la, PhD dissertation, in 1990, he talks about comparative study of the world of animals as depicted by Libyan and English proverbs. However, Abu Sha'la doesn't provide a convincing notion of the background to those proverbs. So he talks about proverbs, comparison between both of the languages, how interpreted into English, but he didn't provide the context. The researcher here means that this is the difference between his thesis, his dissertation, and Abu Sha'la's. According to Elef Irsozoglu research in 2000, it was about translation strategies for proverbs, and it's totally different from the previous studies explained. The nature of her study was to analyze and discuss the notion of how Turkish proverbs can be rendered into another culture. She explored really in depth the ways of rendering them in a satisfying way into another language. Actually, it was English. Salwa Ahmed, 2005. This is the last one. As a previous study, she concluded that some Sudanese and English proverbs have the same functions in both cultures, specifically those proverbs related to women and women's rights. Her research revolved around the educational and social values expressed by proverbs in those two cultures, knowledge and use of proverbs in Sudan and England. This study is really different from all those I explained earlier because it mainly focuses on analyzing them based on micro and macro levels and explaining the context of each of those proverbs. Chapter 3. Introduction. I don't think I have to define translation, right? Do I have to skip this part? What do you think?
Well, it's actually your responsibility to choose whether you're going to discuss this or not.
Okay, am I taking so much time because I'm worried because Yvonne and Stella are actually me representing the first 3 chapters. They are representing the last 3 chapters. So is it okay? I'm worried about. I'm just worried about time.
It's totally up to you. But I would say this. I should have said this later after the
Yes.
3 of you present. But the 3 of you should have simulated this before.
Yeah.
So
So
you
how many
know when
times
you will exit the time. So now it's
Yes.
like 13:45.
So I mean, how many time do we have left? Hello, Pa.
Yes, I'm listening and coming. So we have 45 minutes.
We have 45 minutes left.
Indeed, 45 minutes.
Okay, great. Okay, so chapter 3 approaches translation. The translation of cultural science remains challenging task for translator, as shown earlier in chapter 2. Translators cannot afford to live in the target culture just to be well acquainted with it, because as we explained that to be able to understand, to translate very well, you need to be acquainted with the target culture as well. And that doesn't mean that if you want to translate a culture context, for example, you have to go live in a country for a specific time to be able to understand this culture very well. So this is the use of translation theories. It can help to make the translator be able at least to grasp and to know how to handle or tackle those cultural contexts. This chapter will provide a number of translation approaches which have been acknowledged as best known theories. The first one is Catford's, the second is Nida's, and the third is the linguistic theories model of Bay Grande and Dressler in 1981. Catford theory of translation in 1965. According to Catford, translation is an operation performed in languages, a process of substituting a text in one language for a text in another. Catford's linguistic theory is based on Halliday's scale and category grammar. So what's Halliday's scale and category grammar? Halliday created a well-organized systematic foundation for explaining language as a part of human language experience, and suggested that any action made by a human, even the speech of children, is a possible key for discovering the real nature of language and linguistics, according to Halliday in 2003. Catford found that it's possible to apply linguistic theory to the translation process. He made it different between textual equivalence, the meaning of a text, and formal correspondence, which means the deep structural meaning of the text. According to him, translation takes place on the basis of textual equivalence. Full versus partial translation. I'm sorry if the slide is not that clear, but because I had to insert words in Arabic, then I had to take them a screenshot. So I apologize if it was not that clear. Full versus, this is the first aspect of translation of Catford, provided by Catford. According to Catford, full translation means that every unit of a text, starting from the text as a whole down to the small unit, from the whole into the smallest unit of text, which is a word, must be rendered. Everything should be rendered. Full translation includes all aspects, grammatical, phonic, lexical, and have to be replaced with the target language equivalent aspects. This type of translation is only helpful in non-literally texts, because if you're supposed to be translating everything literally, you're not supposed to produce something that's creative or literary. I mean, in literary text, I don't think it's going to be working. Cannot be applied to translating cultural science as well. Example for that, the boy went to the market. ذهب الولد إلى السوق. The boy went to the market. ذهب, went الولد, the boy, إلى, to, السوق, the market. So every single aspect of this sentence, every unit was translated the same. Partial translation, it is the act of rendering the whole text from one language into another while leaving some units of source text untranslated. So we leave some aspects not translated, and that can be used in literary texts and translating cultural science as well. Example for that would be لا عطر بعد عروس, which would be translated as no perfume after a bride. لا, no, عطر, perfume, بعد, after, عروس, it means bride actually. So it sounds like literal, but it's not literal because the word arus here, it doesn't mean bride, it means the name of a person. So, so if we translated it a bride, then that would distort the meaning. It would be totally wrong. So if you didn't know the context, you wouldn't be able to know that arus, this is a name for a person. And it happens to be that the word arus, it means in Arabic bride as well. So total versus the next one, total versus restricted translation. According to Catford, total translation requires the replacement of source language grammar and lexis by equivalent target language grammar and lexis, with consequential replacement of source language phonology and graphology. And maybe I need to ask you later about graphology, but after the presentation. هذا الولد الذي قابلته. هذا this الولد the boy الذي that قابلته I met him. This is a boy I met him. But if we translated that in English, we would not say this is a boy I met him. We just say this is a boy I met. Restricted translation, on the other hand, is the replacement of source language textual materials by equivalent target language textual material at only one level. That is translation performed only at the phonological or at the graphological level. So you have to sacrifice one level to be able to fulfill the other level. Example for that, this kind of translation will deliver distorted meaning, especially when it comes to translating proverbs, modern standard Arabic proverbs. A grammatical translation, أقوى من كلبة حومل, it means hungrier than Haumal's dog. Haumal, this is the name of person. So grammatical translation would be something like that, IER, which signifies the comparative form, IER, hungrier, then gawa, it means hungry, and then we have gap, it's nothing, then min, the preposition from, then space, nothing, then kalbatu haumal, it means haumal's dog. So the lexical translation was going to be like that, hungry, then nothing, then the alif letter, which means a, it means the comparative form in Arabic language, then haumal's dog. Then we have then haumal's dog. So this is a grammatical translation, this is a lexical one. Rank translation. Rank translation, we have two types of rank translation, rank bound and unbounded translation. In rank bound translation, the target language equivalents are bound to only one rank on the grammatical scale. It usually operates like a hierarchy, moving from the lowest rank and morpheme via the rank of word and close to the highest level, which is a sentence. In unbounded translations, the translation process operates freely. So the difference between them in rank, they are bound by the hierarchy that they should be sticking to, but in unbounded translation, it's free. And it shifts along from one rank to another, moving up and down the scale. It's okay to do it. Unbounded translation often takes place at sentence level. According to Malk Jr. 2005, for example, من كثر همه قصر أجله. This, it means in Arabic, the people who are really distressed a lot, their age would be shorter. And this is, by the way, translation for that. Curiosity killed the cat. Word for word translation, الهم قتل القطة. الهم قتل القطة, it means distress or sadness. قتل, killed, cat, it means the cat, القطة. Literal translation, الهم قتال, the distress is like has a vital effect on people. It makes people get dies, lose their life. Free translation, من كثر همه قصر أجله. Those people who are really distressed a lot, their age are shortened. Their ages are shortened. Translation shifts. According to Malkjair, I don't know how to pronounce it, 1998, the term translation shift is used in literature to refer to changes which occur or may occur in the process of translation. Since translation is a type of language, the notion of shift belongs to the domain of linguistic performance. According to Catford, he narrowed down his theory of shifts into two major types: level shifts, which operate at tense level, and category shifts, which can be divided into rank, bound, and unbounded translation. Level shifts. The concept of level shifts means an source language text at one linguistic level has a target language translation equivalent at another level. So it is at one level, but it has a translation at a different level. In this case, the most common translation level shifts possible are from grammar to lexis and vice versa. Example for that would be رجع بخفي حنين. It means he came back with Hunayn's shoes. That means he's disappointed. He came back with failure. He came back with the shoes of Hunayn. Actually translated them. He has come back with the shoes of Hunayn. He had come back with the shoes of Hunayn. What I want to highlight here is that in Arabic we don't have past tense, we don't have past perfect tense, we don't have present tense, we just have past tense. So all those probably translated in Arabic as رجع بخفين حنين, he came back with the shoes of Hunayn. It's up to translator to choose any of them because we don't have those tenses in Arabic language. Category shifts. They are departure or moving from formal correspondence in the translation. It's true to say that sometimes there is sentence equivalence in the process translation from Arabic into English. Example, اذهب حيث ألقات رحلة, go to where قش through its saddle. اذهب حيث رمت رحلها. قحل. I don't know how to say the word because I wrote it in translate in English words, but it means that go to where قش through its saddle. حيث ألقت رحلها. Rank bound translation is total translation in which target language equivalents are restricted. For example, it's raining cats and dogs. إنها تمطر قطة وكلابا. This is very literal translation because if we say it's raining cats and dogs, it means it's raining really hard, but it was translated. This is just an example. We don't translate it like that. It's raining إنها. It is raining cats and dogs. If they actually translated literally, which of course distorting the meaning totally. Unbounded translation in the case of category shifts is gonna be like that. If we say it's raining cats and dogs, إنها تمطر بغزارة. It's raining really hard. So that makes sense because here you are moving from one rank into another. This is unbounded translation, unrestricted one. Unit shifts. Unit shifts, it means mainly about the grammatical order in Arabic and how is it going to be changed into language. For example, يجري بليق ويضم. بليق, this is the name of person. He runs and is disparaged. بليق runs and is disparaged. The structure is different from Arabic into English because in this sentence we're starting by يجري. And then in Arabic, we assume that there is a pronoun هو, which means he. يجري بليق. This is the name of person, the subject. Then we start by the verb. Then we have بليق, the subject. Then ويضم, another verb. بليق runs, and it's just disparate in English. It's gonna be subject, predicate, and complement. So class shifts. A class is defined as that grouping of members of given unit, which is defined by operation the structure of the unit next above. For example, the city is beautiful. Noun plus the qualifier. Here we have the noun, the city, and the qualifier. Then we have, for example, modifier. The modifier here is Jamila, which means beautiful. Then the head, it means Al-Madina, the city. Then we have article, which is the. So we have modifier and the adjective as well. The city is beautiful. Al-Madina Jamila. Modifier plus the head. The head is the city, of course, and the modifier is Jamila, which means beautiful. And the Medina, of course, means the city. Nida's theory of translation, it mainly focuses on naturalness and mainly to focus dynamic equivalent. So it's kind of flexible theory because Nida, he just doesn't care about if you're sticking to the meaning word by word, or literal translation. It just wants you to deliver the meaning as accurate as it could. According to Nida, translating consists in reproducing the receptor language, the closest meaning, the closest natural equivalent message should be delivered. First, in terms of meaning, and secondly, in terms of style. So mainly in terms of meaning and style. A literal translation, formal equivalence would create problems in culture such as schemas. For example, schemas, they don't have, if in all culture, especially in English culture, if you say lamb, it means innocence. It refers to innocence. I think even in culture, in Turkish language as well, even in Arabic culture. But then in schemas, they do not have any connotations in their minds when you say lamb. So the translator would use dynamic equivalent by saying seal of God, the seal being associated with innocence in their culture. The process to be applied here, analysis, transfer, structuring, then we have the results. The process of the source language text analysis to reduce a person's lifespan, for example, transfer, the process transferring meaning from source language to target language in the mind, that happens in the mind of the translator. Then the translator does the restructuring process, deciding between available equivalent saying, then he decides which one he's going to be choosing. Then we have the result, something like curiosity kills the cat. Cat is used as a warning in situations when, for example, I'm warning you, if you're asking too many things, just be careful. Curiosity killed the cat. So do not be curious. Do not ask many things that none of your business. From Nida's point of view, types of analysis required are back transformation and the ones related to components, and analysis related to components of meaning, componential analysis of meaning. And their purpose, as Nida states, discovering the kernels underlying the source text and the clearest understanding of those meanings, of those texts. First, the analysis related to components. Components analysis means the study of words that share some aspects of meaning. Take, for example, the word shiver and quake. We say earthquake, we say shivering. Those two words can contribute to the meaning of vibrating, but with different variations and with different, they are semantically different. For example, shivering, if you're feeling cold, and shivering and quaking, for example, you say earthquake, something that's shaking really hard. So semantically different. They have some aspects meaning that are shared, but still semantically different. This analysis is used to find out semantic components via the words and to be able to label them according to Yang and Chu, 2001. Back translation. This technique can make the process transformation from source language into target language less vague and much clearer. Back transformation means dividing a text into 4 basic components: noun, verbs, abstracts, and linked verbs. So mainly about conjunctions. And for example, these 4 components can be sorted within a text like that. She sings beautifully. Then we have verb. Then we have adverb. The beauty for singing. All of those expressions almost revolve around the same meaning, but with different aspects that are different. Like here, adverb and verb, the beauty of her singing. Then we have the beauty of her singing. Then we have a noun. Then we have her singing is beautiful, a pronoun, her beautiful singing, adjective, and singing is like journals, something related to verbs. So equivalence and translation. Equivalence is a central and a key word in translation. It's also a controversial concept. 2 types of problems arise in regard to equivalence. First, semantic equivalence. Second, equivalence in texts that have cultural and literary dimensions, according to Basnet, 1991. Formal equivalence. First one. This is not a word-for-word translation, but a literal type of translation. This type of equivalence helps readers comprehend text easily. For example, if you say man proposes and God disposes, birds of a feather flock together, put your trust in God but keep your power. your powder dry. I just translate the first one. Man proposes and God disposes. It's translated the man suggests and God handles or tackles. And of course, it looks so awkward to hear it, even in Arabic, by the way. I just translated literally the Arabic translation written here. It looks so awkward because it's formal equivalence. When formal equivalence is applied, it distorts the message that needs to be delivered, producing nonsense. And I highlighted the word nonsense and distorts because that's what happens when we use formal equivalence. Dynamic equivalence. In this type, the same examples that I explained earlier, man proposes and God disposes. It's here translated العبد في التفكير والله في التدبير. It means just you as it means that you as a person who's a servant of Allah, you should be thinking only. You should be thinking, and Allah just like do whatever you can, and then Allah is going to help you. So this is the accurate translation actually, and the closest in meaning. العبد في التفكير والله في التدبير. And the birds, birds of a feather flock together. It's translated in Arabic الطيور على أشكالها تقع, which means people who are similar to each other, they get together. So in this type of translator has the freedom. Freedom is the key word to change source language words by adding or removing. But what really matters, the condition here is that the meaning is delivered accurately. Newmark's translation process. The 8 types of translation according to Newmark's word for word translation. لا عطر بعد عروس, no perfumes after عروس. Every word is translated word by word. And you can even learn the use of important vocabulary by trying not to look up words because you can see each one is equivalent exactly to the one in the target language. Literal translation, the close adherence to the surface structures. Example, it's raining cats and dogs. الدنيا بتمطر بشدة شديدا. Literal translation, تمطر شديدا, تمطر مطرا شديدا. It's raining really hard. So it's not like word for word, but still deliver the meaning, but the close adherence to the surface structure. Faithful translation. A faithful translation, translators are faithful not in rendering words. A faithful translation tries to reproduce a precise contextual meaning of the original within the constraints of the target language grammatical structures. I didn't find examples for that. Semantic translation, for example, to add fuel to the fire. Then to add fuel to the fire in Arabic, صب البنزين على النار. صب البنزين, add fuel to the fire. It means that you are making the situation worse. So here it's translated semantically. Adaptation. Adaptation, this is the freest model because it gives freedom to the translator that to use the closest meaning from the target culture. Free translation. In this form, translator is free to change words and word order, but is not free to change the meaning. Much ado about nothing. It means that people are, in Arabic we say which means that I see people grinding, I hear people grinding the sound of milk, but I can't see no flour. Idiomatic translation, according to Walker Jones, idiomatic translation attempted to understand the meaning of one language, expresses the meaning in idioms that are spatial genius. Example of that, I give the example. This is my example. Grass is not greener on the other side, which means that people usually like to go to the other side, even if they have grass that's greener on their side, they prefer to go to the other side. In Arabic, we say something like الشيخ البعيد سره باتع. The sheikh who is far is known to be having special powers. So that means that probably if we have a store that's nearby that we can buy something from nearby location, we just ignore the nearby location, we go to the far one. And no specific reason for that except that we believe that the far thing is better. Communicative translation, Newmark, 1988, explained that communicative translation attempts to render the exact contextual. So this is the key word here is the contextual meaning. That has to do, the focus is on context in delivering the meaning. So probably this is the closest to the model that wants to be delivered by this dissertation. Text linguistic approach, first cohesion. Cohesion means that the text is cohesive. بيدي لا بيدي عمرو, by my hand, not by your hand, عمرو. And then in Arabic proverbs, the most prominent element when discussing cohesion is repetition. Says Mona Baker explained that in Monday, I don't know how to say his name, 2001, Arabic prefers lexical repetition to variation. And it's totally accepted in Arabic. Subject-verb agreement is an aspect that should be considered as well. But then, for example, in English, they didn't repeat the word yarika, but say by my hand, not by yours. It's supposed to be by yours, but here it's translated by your hand, Amr. But it's supposed to be by my hand, not by yours, Amr. And of course, I explained the meaning of the proverb is that a person, instead of being killed by someone or hurt by someone, they decide to hurt themselves. Coherence, according to Grande and Ressler, they classify that is concerned with textual word and concepts and the relations between them. For example, من شارك السلطان في عز الدنيا شاركه في ذل الآخرة. Whoever shares the glory of the sultan is going to be sharing the humiliation as well. So it's mainly about the agent. Who is the agent in the text, in the text here? And of course, for this example, for example, the sultan is the agent. This is just an example to be able to know that it's about the agent and relations connecting the utterances. Intentionality argues that Grande argues that intentionality as a standard concern. It means that fulfilling the producer's intentions. You focus on the producer's intention, the one who wants to produce the text, what's his goal in producing this text. Acceptability, is it acceptable for the target leader or not? Example for that, أسمع قعقاتا ولا أرى طحنا. I hear the sound of grinding, but I cannot see any flour. Much ado about nothing. Empty vessels make the most sound. All of them have the same meaning. Informativity, it means that you have to provide something new. And يعلم من أين تؤكل الكتف, this is an example. It means he knows where the shoulder of the sheep can be eaten, because this is something very culturally bound in Arabic culture, because even only people who are really rich people maybe knows how to, because they eat meat all the time, they know how to eat the shoulder of the sheep, because it's very hard to eat it. Then they start from the top to down. So it means he knows from where a shoulder of a lamb should be eaten. It means that that person knows how to do a task successfully, very well. Situationality, the situationality of a text is a major component of their textuality. Situationality is a decisive factor in translating for the reason that's used as a tool to facilitate the meaning of whatever a text is to be. Example, على نفسها جنب براقش. Barakish brought harm to her people. And by the way, Barakish, this is the name of a dog that barked with her voice, and they were hiding from enemies. But because she barked very loud, the enemies could know the location and killed everybody. So we use it most of the time up till now to see that some people cause harm to themselves because they didn't handle the situation wisely. Intertextuality, of course, I just give example I won't explain that, but for example, if you know the novel Joseph Andrews, it's a novel about the main lead of the novel was a very nice person, and the intertextuality in that novel, because it was based on the character of Nabi Joseph, because Nabi Joseph was seduced by a woman, Zulaikha, and the same applies to the character in this novel of Joseph Andrews. He was seduced by a character as well. So intertextuality, it means that we build on a text in another text that was existing before this text. Thank you so much. Sorry.
Okay, next speaker.
Yes.
Good afternoon and good morning from here.
Yes, we can hear you.
Just a minute.
Okay.
Yeah,
And
just a
you need
minute.
to turn off your
Yes,
screen
yes,
sharing. So
yes. Yeah, just a minute.
please present the next Stella, I think, Stella can
Yes, yes.
share.
Just a minute.
So I think this is your screen, Stella.
Actually, it's Yvonne who is sharing, but yes, we'll be presenting with her. So I'll be continuing with chapter 4 of the problems of translation at micro and macro levels. So going on, yes, we'll see that we have two kinds. At the micro, we have the syntax, the semantics, and the stylistics. At the macro, we have the situation, context, and the setting. So I'll discuss them further in the next slide. Yes, so first of all, before we discuss them, it's important to ask ourselves, why is it important to evaluate translation errors? Now, according to Nord, he says that this is good in order to develop methods of error prevention. And once you know how to prevent that, we're also able to have error therapy. We know how to fix that. Again, for us, why it's important to evaluate this, we're able to get the quality of translation and compare it now to the theory of translation. And ADAP 2000 also mentioned that evaluation is important when choosing the potential translation. In this case, we're able to have to amend the choices, and then we're able to give the text as a global message. So in this particular study, the evaluation process will show if the students' translated proverbs have managed to maintain the same quality, and have they conveyed the effect, and have they given the intended meaning of the source text proverbs. So this is what we're going to look at in this particular chapter. Going on. Yes, so why is it important to have, because we have said we need to evaluate these errors. So how do we do this assessment? Now we first have to identify what is a translation error assessment. This is a process. And what this process does, it explores the in-depth of the mistakes. Now these are mistakes that are made by the students who are doing the translation and the trainees of the translation. Now, according to Nord, 1977, there are 4 types of errors, or what we call translation errors. We have the pragmatic, we have the cultural, we have the linguistic, and the text specific. Now, pragmatic have to do with the orientation of the target text. Cultural have to do with either the reproduction or the adaptation. Are those cultural specific norms being incorporated there? Then you have the linguistic. These are both the language structure and, of course, the text itself. These are the errors that you'll find in, or the translation errors you might find. Going on further. Now, as I mentioned, we'll discuss micro level translation errors and macro. Now, talking about the micro, according to Willis, a translator should spend a significant amount of time dealing with these contextual problems. And you're going to find several of them. One reason why we should do this is because many source texts have vagueness. Sometimes the syntactical concept is quite complex. Again, the adjectives, the nouns, the metaphorical expressions, these are things we should look at. And one way is to analyze the micro level, so that when it comes to micro level errors, we find that we can find them in terms of syntax, in terms of semantics and style. As you can see, these are related to the phenomena there. So we'll begin with the first one. These are the syntactic transition errors. Of course, you know about syntax. These are about word construction and how these can be combined to form sentences. Now, why is it hard now to translate? Because the text or this paper we are discussing is an Arabic paper, and proverbs in Arabic can also compare to English. Now, we see that the grammatical structure of these two languages are completely different. They're not the same. So that's why it gets hard to translate. The other one is the component of the sentence. You find that in the Arabic language, the elements are different in terms of sentence structure, in terms of clauses, in terms of prepositions, gender, numbers. That's why it gets quite hard to translate between the two languages. Going on. Yes, this is just an addition to what we have mentioned. For example, you'll see that Arabic is considered a verbal language. You can see the word order. It begins with a verb, then there's a subject and the object. So that is a VSO word order. But look at the English. It is it's considered a nominal language, and the sentence order is subject, verb, object, SVO. So sometimes it brings in the challenges in translation. So what I did, because the text was, most of the proverbs were in Arabic, and I don't know Arabic, I cannot read it. So I used my own language to what I would understand. So a good example, for example, when you see rules of Arabic, the word order means that the adjective, for example, beautiful, must follow the noun. But now when it comes now to translating that into English, which we know it is a noun and then an adjective, so you're going to find that the pattern of Arabic is going to be a girl beautiful. So we see this, that aspect. Now I used my own language.
I think we are losing Stella. Let's wait.
Sorry?
Yeah, we're losing you for 10 seconds. So yeah, no worries. Carry on.
Okay, but can you hear me now?
Yeah, it's okay now.
Okay, I'll continue. So as I was saying, I have used Swahili. This is a Swahili proverb that says chanda chema huvikwa pete. Now, if you are to do a back translation, that would mean a finger handsome gets the ring. So you see the word order now becomes different. So, and of course, the handsome finger gets the ring. That's the way it's supposed to be. But of course, you see the word order becomes an issue when it comes to translating. Okay, going on. The other errors under the micro level are semantic translation errors. Of course, you know semantics has to do with meaning. And under this, we have for semantic 4 features of semantics: the synonymy, collocation, polysemy, and monosemy. Going on. So let's talk about synonymy itself when it comes to translation. Now, synonymy has been defined as one of two or more words in English which have the same or very nearly the same essential meaning. Ghazala 95 actually gives 2 types. We have the absolute. These ones are completely identical in meaning. And then we have the near or close synonyms. These are words that are related to one another in meaning. Look at that example. I saw a spring near a spring in the spring. It springs like a spring. All those words, the spring used there are all different. I saw a spring near a spring in the spring. So the synonyms and all that. Going on. Now we have collocation. Now collocation is the occurrence of one word in close proximity to another. A good example in English, we say jump to conclusion. But now if you were to translate that, maybe the example given in the paper, you'd find that you might find it's being to jump to the results. So you can see they don't collocate at all. So that's one of the problems faced. Another example, like in Swahili, I took like marafiki, ni marafiki wachana na pete. These loose translation, they are friends of finger and ring. You know, that is to mean they stick together. But of course, in English, you're unlikely to find something like that. So collocation, chana na pete always goes together, but you'll never find finger and ring as a saying in English. Going on. Now we have problems in the stylistic level. We are still at the micro. Of course, stylistics has to do with the choice of words and the grammatical structures used. Again, you can see Arabic language has been affected especially by influence from European languages. We're told that many Arabic-speaking intellectuals have been moving back and forth between Arabic and English. So that's sometimes you might find there are problems at the stylistic level when it comes to translation. Going on. Now, another aspect that has been mentioned there is passivization, use of passive voice. Now, look at the active there. Someone stole the car. In English, it's quite simple. You simply say the car was stolen by someone. But when it comes now to the Arabic aspect, there's a challenge. For example, if you see the first pattern there, pattern 1, katala, he killed. What happens is the change in the internal voweling. What happens is the vowel now. So for you to pacify that or to show the passive aspect, he was killed, you say kutila. So you can see that becomes a challenge because now changing, it's unlike English where you have to do the whole moving of the sentence. But this one, or the words that is, but in this case, you're just changing the internal vowels. So these are some of the aspects you might find. Again, you might find there's also unnecessary repetition. For example, it's not by my hand, Amr, but by your hand. So instead of, it could have been, it is not by my hand, but yours. So you find in Arabic, there are those unnecessary repetition when it comes to translation. That has to do with the semantic aspects. Going on. Now, yes, you've discussed the micro. Let's now look at the macro. These ones are divided into 3 also. One is the situation. So the situation has to do with the socio-cultural activity. So we are assuming in this case that a source language and the target language, they have to assume a kind of familiarity between, in terms of the norms and the conventions. Actually, true that according to the situation, you might consider things like using the English term and inserting information to explain or adding a footnote. Yes, because some you find that daily norms and conventions may not be the same between the source and the target cultures. Going on. Yes. So under the situation, we have now the context of situation, which according to Halliday and Hassan, 1989, has been defined as the immediate environment in which a text is actually functioning. And here we find ourselves asking who, where, what, why, where, when, which, and whom. And according to Nida's model, she gives several contexts, and the first one is the syntagmatic. For example, when you say the boy was running or the horse was running, now we find that the movement here is being done by foot. But what if, again, if you might find yourself saying the clock is running, the machine is running. So you can see here no feet is being, or no movement of feet is being involved. So this is just the context one might want to consider while doing a translation. Looking at the other models. Yes, you have the pragmatic context. These to determine the meaning of words by contrasting. For example, we know words like talk, whisper, and all that. They all belong to the domains of noises. But again, sometimes that might not apply to all cultures. Some source language might have a different way of having these meanings. Then you have contexts that involve cultural values. These are deliberate choice of different terms, which reflect particular cultural values within a specific society. Yes, that has to do with the kind of context culture has. Then you have the radical shift context. For example, delicious. Delicious does not have any connection with the concept of taste. For example, when you say that is a delicious idea, you're not saying the idea is sweet or tasty. So sometimes you might want to identify, because these are some of the problems you'll face. You'll find a delicious idea, but in another in the other language we don't have that. Then you have the intertextual context. A good example is Shakespeare's word, a very common phrase, to be or not to be. So if that, you may find it somewhere. So that is, I think Hen had mentioned about the intertextuality. Yes, these are some of the things you might have to bring in that are already known. Going on to the other context. Yes, the audience of a discourse as a context. Yes, for example, who are you, who is the audience of the particular discourse? You see, like close friends would, use informal language between each other. But again, that plot might expand. For example, if they have to change, if they're in a different context, they will change the kind of language they're using and all that. Going on. And lastly, we have the phonetic symbolism. This is a high number of S sounds, like this is an example, number of S-like sounds and repeated usage of nasal consonants like D and R. Sometimes you have to take, this might pose a challenge because some languages have repeated use of nasal consonants, maybe the frequency of D and Rs. So these are some of the challenges likely to be faced. Remember, we're still talking about the macro challenges or problems, and one of them is the situation. Going on. Yes, so finally we have the chapter 5. This is the data analysis. I'll just do a little bit of it. Remember, we have talked about the macro and the micro. So in the micro levels, we told that the author of this paper found that a total number of errors made by the participants in the attempts to translate were 522. Of these, 295 were semantic, 202 were syntactic, and only 25 were stylistic, such that we have 56% of them being semantic, 39% being syntactic, and only 5% being stylistic. So these are the micro level errors. And then you have the semantic levels. Now that is under the micro. The semantic ones are mainly comprised of the synonyms, the compound noun errors, the non-equivalent error, the non-equivalent semantic errors, which were 57%, that is 169. Synonym we are just 34%, 100 errors, and compound noun errors were only 9%. Those were 26 errors made. Going on. Yeah, I think, Ivanda, is that yours from there?
Yes, Stella.
Okay, thank you. Ivanda will continue from there. She'll continue the errors and all that.
Thank you, Stella. Good afternoon, Sir Prihantoro and friends. I am Ivanda, and I will continue the rest of presentation. Second errors at the level of micro is syntactic level errors. So these errors, they occur at the level of grammar. The analysis of the thesis shows that the participants experience major difficulties with certain English grammar rules, hence they fail to form construction correctly. These errors categorized as SVA or subject-verb agreement. As you can see, SVA 20% errors, and also at tense level. Tense levels. The errors is 24%, and adjective errors. The errors is the errors are 23%, and the most errors is in the articles, which is 33% errors. Syntactic translation errors or the errors of grammar produce all sounding or incorrect expressions in the sounds in the target language. Hence, it sounds unnatural to native speakers. However, syntactic errors don't greatly affect the intended meaning of proverb, but rather merely produce broken proverbs. This is the categories of mistakes: errors at tense levels, errors in the usage of comparative adjectives, errors in the use of articles, adverb, preposition, and auxiliaries, errors in subject and verb agreement. We will see example of these categories one by one. Okay, the first one, errors at tense level. There are 48 errors out of 202 syntactic errors. The analysis suggested that students found it hard to distinguish tenses in proverbs, perhaps because the mismatch between the range of tense in source language and target language, as explained by Han before that. In Arabic language, there are only two tense, present tense and past tense, while in target language, which is English, there are 12 tenses. So yeah, there are quite wide range mismatch between tenses in source language and target language. For example, over here from M is AP2, this is the the proverbs in Arabic. I tried to convert it into English, but sadly the Google Translate couldn't read it. So I'm sorry that I have to put the original version over here, which is the from the Arabic language. Okay, the MACP is translated as this. First, the blind lead another blind, and another translation, blind lead a blind, and the last, glimmer lead the glimmer. Here we can see that the students or the participants fail to recognize the third person singular, as we know that if the third person singular, then the verb should be followed by s or es. So the correct one should be like the blind leads another blind, blind leads a blind, and glimmer leads glimmer, or glimmer leads glimmer. So this is the example of errors at tense levels. The second error, the errors usage in the comparative adjectives. There are 20 errors of comparative adjectives. So students' translation were incorrect, but perfectly understandable into native speaker of English. For example, over here, this proverb is translated as more brave than Osama. We know that this is incorrect because brave only have one syllable, then it should be at suffix er to show the comparison. So it should be like braver than Osama, not more brave than Osama. And the second example, as strong as Osama, we see that as plus subject plus adjective and plus s is used to compare the same thing or similar thing. It's not to compare the thing that is different. So, well, this is grammatically incorrect, but as said before, perfectly understandable into the native speakers of English. And the third, errors in the use of articles and preposition. There are 34% of the total errors at syntax level. So the participant misuse articles, preposition, and auxiliaries. In general, participants tend to neglect in their translation and rely solely on the semantic content. For example, from IMACP2, the participants' translations was speech Kurafa, while the correct translation should Kurafa's speech, the speech of Kurafa. This is one of the example from data of for the errors in the use of article and preposition. Errors in subject-verb agreement. There are 20% error at the syntactic level, and this is because, as explained again by Han before, that in English the sentence begin with subject and verb, subject then verb, while in Arabic it is verb and subject. Because and also this is supported by a study of Izahar in 2010. He said that interlingual errors are caused the interference of learner's mother tongue. So the participants fail to transfer language from their mother tongue to the target language, or they use the ideology of their mother tongue language to transfer it into the target language. The example over here, this is one of the translation from the participants. Know from where eaten soldier, while it should be he knows from where the soldier should be eaten, or he knows how to eat lamb's shoulder. This is the translation is there's no subject in the translation, while in English it should have subject and then verb. And another example is get together Suhai and Suha. It should be Suhai and Suha will not meet anymore. So again, subject and then verb, not verb then subject. And the third error and the last error in the level of micro is stylistic level errors. This includes the passive voice and also cohesive features such as repetition. So participants' errors show that they face serious difficulties in creating appropriate text structures, as the following section will demonstrate. Repetition. Participants struggle to apply appropriate strategies to cope with these stylistic features because in the basic term, source language, Arabic like classical repetition, and whereas target language, English doesn't. I think we have discussed it in our previous meeting. But they use repetition with some purpose. There are two main purposes. First, as aesthetic qualities of a text and rhetorical devices. Second, text building devices contributing to the cohesion of the text. The example of repetition. It is by my hand, not your hand, Ambro. And in English, will be more natural if it is translated as it is by my hand, not yours, Ambro. And next is
the passive voice errors. So Arabic language prefers active sentence to passive one. On the other hand, English language frequently forms sentence in passive voice. Baker states that translating Arabic passive into English and vice versa may affect the intended meaning. In fact, and because of that, students make some errors in the passive, in terms of passive voice, and the result shows that 40% of students choose to render the passive Arabic voice as an active one in English, which led to the change in the meaning. Example over here, this symbol of Arabic or this word in Arabic should be translated as is disparage, while the student translation, they translate it into active form, which is his disparities, or not is disparage but disparities. And another 40% of students change the Arabic passive verb into a past form of the verb into the English translation. So this is it should be translated as disparaged, but they translated it as dispraised. So from passive to past. And after look at the micro level, then we move to the macro levels errors. So these micro levels closely relates to the situation and context in the MSAPS. The situation and the context for each proverbs for each MSAPA was provided for them in Arabic in order to help the participants translate them accordingly. And this is the scheme as explained by Han previously. Yes means the situation and context MSP correctly, they translate it correctly. Yes, but they translate it in the situation of the MSAP, but didn't mention the context. No means the students translate the situation of the MSAP, but the translation is not comprehensible. No, but means the students didn't translate the situation of the MSAP, but provide dynamic equivalence in the target language, missing data the students left the situation and the context untranslated. So from these schemes, we got this result. 70 out of 10 translation, 400 translations, 70 for yes, 26 for yes but, 117 for no, 65 for no but, and 122 for missing data. This is the example. He knows how a shoulder of a lamb should be eaten. This is the correct translation, and consider this translation like to below these two. This is from the participants. The first translation: Arab says shoulder from bottom because you test from above, hard to test. So this participant perfectly understand the content, but he or she failed to translate the meaning. While the second one, he knows his job. This is the translator provide the equivalence meaning, but not the context. So if for any, if I read the translation and I don't know what the context is yet, it is. That's the example. And another example is they translate it literally. Every seat is hanged by its cock. It is the correct one, while this is every seat attached from its leg. So the participants translate it literally. Or this is could be if we render to the this to the scheme, then the first example here is they translate the understand the meaning, understand the situation, but fail to translate it into the translate it correctly. Then it would be no. It will be referred to no, translate the situation of the English thing, but the translation is not comprehensible. If for the second he knows his job, then if we render to the scheme, then it will be no bad because the translator also only provide the dynamic equivalence but not the situation. And the third example here will refer to the missing data, MD, because there's no situation and the context at all. The translator translates it literally. So the highlighted ideas from the chapter 5 is first, in terms of their performance, the students' corpus shows very poor knowledge in choosing and structuring English sentences. And their level of competence is still weak, although some of them make good attempt because a lot of students translate proverbs in terms of micro levels without paying any attention to the proverbs macro levels. So the solution is they have to provide students have to be provided with the micro as well as the micro as well as micro levels of the proverb in order to convey its intended meaning to the target readers. The last chapter, chapter 6, conclusion, findings, and recommendation. First, this is the summarized for the theories used by the authors. In the work of Catford and Basnet, equivalence operates on surface textual features, whereas Naide and Newmark view this concept as serving to communicate the intended meaning to the target language reader. And then language and culture are inextricably linked, or as Haynes said, language and culture are like flesh and blood. So translator must understand cultural reference in order to produce a comprehensible translated text. And it was concluded that despite numerous attempts, there is yet no wholly adequate definition of a proverb. And this thesis used 4 key approaches discussed that proposed by Catford, Naide, Newmark, and Begrand and Dressler. Okay, and then the authors also argued for the about Catford and Newmark theory. So according to them, according to the authors, Catford theory of translation is very restricted because when moving from one grammatical system to another, a translator will face lexical problems, specifically for language that have different culture, wide range different culture. And from Naida used his own terminology in his work on translation, moved beyond the borders and the sentence, and attempted to find intended meaning behind the limits of the sentence. However, this approach is still unsatisfactory because it is very hard for translator to find suitable and an equivalent proverb in the target language due to the large gap between the two cultures of language involved, which are Arabic and English. Findings. First, some of the MSAPS don't have their equivalence in the target language because of the large gap between two languages and culture. Second, macro level plays a crucial role in translating MSPA into English. And issue of students translation, issues that find in students translation. The first, the MSPS contains some archaic Arabic words which students didn't understand or are not familiar with. And second, incorrect selection of vocabulary. The last students' mother tongue ideologies interfere with the way they translate it into the target language or English language. And the last recommendation. So teachers who provide students, in this case, a beginner or translator with the necessary dictionary skills, both bilingual and monolingual, and linguistic research skills. And also the author also suggests some future research to use a different set of proverbs. For example, here is Libyan dialects. Okay, that's the end of our presentation. Thank you for your attention.
Okay, thank you very much. So yeah, we are a little bit over time, but allow me to say some bits about the presentation today. I think it will take like 15 minutes, and we might want to start our second class a little bit later, like maybe 10 or 15 minutes late. Okay, so I'm going to start by giving my impression on the presenters. So I think on the first presentation, it needs heavy improvement because I can see that some of my elemental advices that I gave 2 days ago are still ignored. Yeah, I will tell some of the details that are ignored later. The second presentation, I saw some improvements. I can see that some of my advices on doing effective presentation have been taken into account. For the third presentation, it was quite hard to correspond the details to the first presentation, as the distance between the first and third presentation there's quite some gap. Audience, I think it will be easier for the audience to correspond this to the concept described in the second presentation, but very hard to relate to the concept explained in the first presentation, as there were too many over excessive, I think. And good point by Stella on giving examples from other language. I think Bantu. Yeah, I don't speak Swahili, but the points that you made seem to be correct. Okay. And also, Hand, you asked me to ask you to skip unnecessary details when you're doing your presentation. Well, I can't do that, as this is actually your responsibility. To be more precise, your team's responsibility. And as we have limited time, I have already mentioned these. Please keep relevant details. For example, explanation about Benghazi University. So this is really unnecessary. Yeah, less important to, less crucial to discuss. And this would be implicit. I don't have to teach you this basic skill, but you need to simulate the presentation before the team actually present. Ask someone to time you when you're doing the actual presentation. Well, that's not a good idea. This shows that you don't, or your team didn't prepare enough. And actually, it can easily be done by alarm or by requesting a member of the team to inform you instead of the audience. And actually, the team members need to talk before the actual presentation to anticipate things. For example, like someone can take over when there's a technical issue, network problems, etc. I don't know to what extent you cooperate, but I was expecting that you didn't split into like, okay, you present this to this part, you present this to this part, and you present this to this part, and let's just directly do this on the D-Day. No, I didn't expect you to do that. And I was thinking that you know well to cooperate before you present, but I don't know to what extent you cooperated. No more followers background that interface with the font. Okay, good. But in the first presentation, I still see too many words in a slide. So many like full paragraph, for example, or full sentences were still there. And please read chapter 5 again. It has so many cross references to the previous chapters, particularly the literature reviews. And not all bits in the literature review chapters are very relevant. Yeah, once you found relevant bits, please explain that in the presentation. And to save time, if examples are already provided from the analysis, it's better to use it and not repeating from the literature review sections. For instance, you don't need to take examples of repetition from the literature review, as in chapter 5, they are already provided. So this avoids you repeating the same issue. Right, so that's a generic comment. And now, again, this is a basic skill, but I think that I need to make this explicit to you. My recommendation to decide to how best to present, I think you need to read. Second, you need to understand. So to be able to read and to be able to understand, they are two different things. Third, you need to discuss with other team members, and then you need to implement. Writing the presentation point. And then you need to simulate this. Try this like, okay, so one day let's do a rehearsal before the presentation, and you're going to see whether you are over the time or not. Okay, and you can see some points that you repeat, and then you can make the presentation make it more effective, to make the presentation more effective. And then if you encounter any issue, you go back to the previous steps. Maybe you have read, but you don't understand. Maybe you don't cooperate well enough with the other team members. Maybe your presentation slides is over excessive. Yeah, so fix this mistake. Feel free to always go back to the previous points. And then finally, you need to finalize the presentation and prepare for things that you need to anticipate. And my note on this is that I think it's a wrong choice of turn. I believe that Hand is an Arabic speaker, so she should be placed last, because this is where a native speaker's intuition will be very useful to explain Arabic examples. It's not that Anissa did not explain it very well, but we can get more if Hand did explain this. Next, I'm going to tell you about the thesis. Okay, so this is very important. This is the understanding part that I mentioned previously is crucial. So the idea of the thesis is actually quite simple. if you perceive the source language wrong, you're going to produce wrong target language. You're going to produce wrong translation in a target language. Okay. Now, so that's obvious. If you don't understand the target, the source language, then you are not going to produce correct translations. However, even if you perceive the source language right, you can still produce wrong translations by many reasons. And here it's the direction is important. The direction in this thesis is to translate Arabic to English. And this should theoretically be easier than translating English to Arabic. Why? Because, correct me if I'm wrong, but all the students here, they speak Arabic as the first language. Yeah. And please let me know if you think the other way around. But there is a problem. What is the problem? They need to translate Proverbs. And not everyone knows Proverbs, even in their first language. Like for me, sometimes there are Proverbs that I still don't understand, even though it is in Indonesian. So I think this should apply the same to everyone, unless you are an expert on the Proverbs of your first language. Yeah. So if you want to translate Proverbs well, you need to be proficient both. It's not enough to be proficient in both for source and target language. You also need to know the proverbs in the source language and in the target language. So my approach on translating proverbs, now I'm telling you my approach, is not to translate on the first place. So you go to the source, to the target language, and see if there is an equivalent for the proverbs. Yeah. Only translate if you fail to find the equivalent. If you've already find the equivalent, for instance, a parallel text of the proverbs. So this is the proverbs in Arabic, and this is the translation in English, the good translation in English. Just use that. This is the same like when I was asked to translate Quran. So when someone asked me to translate Quran to English, even though I don't speak Arabic, yeah, well, I can do it. I just find the surah in the Quran and just copy the translation in English and say, okay, the resource is from this person, from this imam, or from this imam, or from the other imam. Okay. So if the translation is wrong, I can say, okay, so based on this imam, this is a valid translation. Because it is really, really dangerous. Well, the danger for mistranslating a proverb is not as bad as translating Holy Bible or Quran. But yeah, that's my approach. Never try to translate in the first place. Just try to find the existing translation. And this is actually a very, very basic translation strategies that I teach in basic translation undergraduate class. So obviously, none of you, I believe that none of you were my students in basic translation class in Undip here, but the first time students take a basic translation class with me, I listed these translation strategies. I can give the list of the translation strategies that I synthesized from lots of different books. So this is for industrial purpose. It is not really theoretical, but I believe that it is practically useful. Right, so this is not the part of the thesis, but this is how I approach translating proverbs and other fixed expression. So get back to the thesis. Yeah, so the thesis is actually very simple. That the author tries to unveil what kind of errors appear, and he used two categories, macro and micro categories. And you need to tell briefly, not into detail, how the author came to decide to use these two categories. And I think Stella presented this. Right, and this is optional. The next stuff that I want to present you ask you to present in the thesis is optional. That you need to explain the different approach among Catford, Nida, Newmark, Diponegoro, and Dressler. So they are all translated experts, but they have different approaches. So I would divide them into two different windows. So Catford and Nida. So they are. So Nida is a missionarist. So the source of the translation is mostly from Bible. So it is a very domain specific. while Nida is a linguist, pure linguist. So the translation is very, very, how do I say, quote unquote, linguistic structure oriented. While Newmark, Bugron, and Dressler, yeah, the other translation experts mentioned earlier, they are more discourse oriented. So here we can see at least there are two different polarities. The first one is on the linguistic structure, a linguistic aspect, and the second one is on the meta-linguistic aspect. And if you still have time, you can explain the difference between among proverbs, idioms, and metaphor. Yeah. But if you don't have time, just skip it. Just say that right now we are describing proverbs. So there are differences between proverbs, idioms, and metaphors. Some aspects they do overlap, but it is not relevant to explain in this presentation. Skip it if you don't have time. Yeah. So what you need to do next is to explain the procedure. Okay, the procedure is as follows. You tell the audience about the procedure, like how many students are studied, how you obtain the data, and so on and so forth. And next, we explain the synthesis of the discussion in very general. So in very general, yeah, the points are two, micro and micro. So in macro, it describes about extra linguistic context and linguistic context beyond structures. So there is a little bit of semantic and stylistic there. The micro context is like the syntactic, semantic, and stylistic. Okay, so this actually goes back to different approaches adopted by first Catford and Nida, which is linguistic structure oriented, and Newmark, Bugron, and Dressler, which is discourse oriented. So it seems that the author is trying to combine both of the approaches. Yeah, and it is quite interesting why he did not. I think it's a he. I don't know. Maybe if you know Arabic names, you can tell whether the author is male or female. But yeah, it is quite interesting for me why he did not mention, not that he did not mention, but he did not discuss Baker. Baker's, it's male. Okay, why he did not discuss Baker? So my guess was correct. Why he did not put Baker's approach in a separate heading? So if you read the thesis, Baker's arguments are described, are written here and there in separate places, but it is not written as separate headings. So this is a bit strange for me because I think Mona Baker is one of the influential figure in translation. But yeah, that's my criticism to the thesis. I always have criticism, even I can criticize my own thesis. So yeah, you can skip this. Okay, but the point is that yeah, it relates to how he adopted two different approaches, two large approaches, linguistic structure and discourse structure. Then after describing this just briefly, yeah, you don't need to explain in detail. Then you take examples from chapter 5. Yeah, for each, as you're presenting the findings. Okay, presenting the findings here is important. And I don't think that thesis is nicely, the data is nicely presented because I don't see gloss. So we can see some Arabic words, but I don't see gloss. Glosses are important because we know that the literal translation is this. If there is a shift in meaning, this is the English translation. So that's how we can identify shift, but I don't see that. So I think this is because perhaps the thesis, even though it is written in English, perhaps it aims on Arabic speakers. Maybe, I don't know. So you present findings from each category, and this is the time to give more details, explain interesting bits. Yeah, and these questions may help. So for example, in page 109 and 97, the author explained about tense errors. Is this a genuine error or is it influenced by Arabic tense? Okay, so for instance, in some languages, like the basic, the canonic form of verb is like infinitive, like in present tense. But in some other languages, the basic form of a verb is a past tense. Another example which I can tell you is about Korean language. So in Korean, there is a very interesting structure where you use past tense structure, but you want to talk about the future. So these, I don't know, maybe Hand or other Arabic speakers can explain about this, whether it is present in Arabic. Yeah, but these can influence why they use wrong tenses. So they are talking about future in English, but they use past tense. It is possible that they are influenced by the linguistic structure of their first language. My example was Korean, yeah, but I don't know whether that is present in Arabic. In page 198, yeah, the drop of definite marker. So I don't know much about Arabic, but I think definite marker is quite prominent in Arabic. Yeah, you can tell me if I'm wrong, please let me know. Yeah, but it is quite interesting. If it is quite prominent in Arabic, the drop should not have happened quite frequently. Yeah, we need to see the frequency, the statistic as well. Yeah. And in page 199, subject-verb agreement in Arabic, they messed up subject-verb agreement in English. So the orientation is always on the target language, English, but you need to relate this to the source language because that's very possible that the reasons for these errors is from the first language. And you need to go back to where I explained the first time, is that wrong perception means wrong production, and right perception doesn't guarantee right production. Okay, you need to go back to that point that you should have explained in the beginning. Now, in English, subject-verb agreement is morphologically marked. Is it the same in Arabic? Yeah, if you can answer this question, yeah, then you can relate, yeah, whether this corresponds to the errors. Because I think the author did not really explain this. Yeah. That's about micro level. But for micro level questions, it is really clear. Why? Because we have already we have the translations ready. The author of the thesis provided the correct translation, the valid translation, and he also presented the wrong translation produced by the students. So they are totally different. Yeah, like one really communicate the meaning and one not. Yeah, so this does not have to be really explained in full details, as the explanation in the thesis is quite straightforward. So you don't need to discuss a lot about this. Yeah, and then you just need to list the recommendations that he provided. So that's it. Yeah, so for me, it took like 15 minutes without a presentation file. Yeah, so this is what you need to do. So you need to meet with the other team members. You need to discuss what the thesis is actually about and decide how you present this. I cannot teach you how to do this. Yeah, I cannot give you quote unquote guidance because every work is different topics, different structure. Yeah, so it really depends on the parts that you have or the documents, the content of the thesis or dissertation that you need to present. And figuring this out is a part of your MA journey. Yeah, please don't discourage by criticisms. Yeah, so just try to do better and not repeating the same mistakes. Yeah, now it's 1500 already, and we should have started our second class. But I actually do have some comments about the thesis. So yeah, as I said, I always have criticism, I even have criticism for my own thesis. But Han asked me one thing about graphology. I'm not sure how to explain this, but it is very easy to explain this if you know the structure of writings of fonts of word languages. So you can categorize fonts or writing systems of different languages into several categories. And graphology is when you when the writing system of one language is almost equivalent to the second language, to the target language. In the thesis, the author mentioned that it's not the same as transliteration. Yes, because the transliteration always writes the vowel, and in Arabic, the writing system is skeleton system. So we call it skeleton system as it only shows the consonants. Well, I can see the vowels in Quran, but if you give me real Arabic writings, I will not be able to do that. So this is so in transliteration, you write the vowels. So those are two different writing systems. Yeah, So it's quite hard to relate that to graphology. If you know the term syllabaries, yeah, syllabaries are a writing system adopted by Japanese and Korean. So they're almost the same. And only if you understand this concept, it would be easy for me to describe graphology. But you can always Google that. That's the best thing that you can do. We have Googles, and that's actually what you should have done before you ask me. You try to Google it by yourself and show me to what extent you have searched. It's like that. Right. So I think that's all about it. Apologize if there's no time for questions, if you have any, because we need to start our second class. But I know that maybe everyone is very tired and I need to do a sort of prayer. So maybe can we start in the next 15 minutes? Can we take 15 minutes break? Yeah, so we start, next 20 minutes, 15:25 here in Indonesia time. And I have marked all of you in the presence list, so you don't need to scan the barcode. Right. So I'll see you in 15 minutes. Okay. So yeah, you can leave this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir.
You're welcome.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.